And hopefully you can join us for October 28th and December 10th for Human Rights Day and our tech event. So those are Saturday morning, and I think it's going to be a Thursday night.
Yes.
So we'd love to have you, Francesca. You're amazing.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, dear. All right. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Norman Solomon. Mr. Solomon, how are you, sir?
I'm hanging in here. Thanks to everybody for this program. And my head is moving in a lot of directions at once. You can't move, I understand, in many directions at the same moment. So I will do my best. And one thought is that although it's rarely, if hardly ever discussed in US media, Russia and the United States have the same nuclear doctrine. And we ought to face that. When Vladimir Putin and Russian officials say that they're prepared to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine if they're losing, that's the identical doctrine of the US military. Every president has said the same damn thing. As a matter of fact, President Biden, who some people want to worship, has said the same thing when he approved the latest national policy review. Came out of the Pentagon, his people wrote it, he signed it, and Biden said point blank, if we're losing, we have the right to be the first to use nuclear weapons. That's the same thing that Putin's saying. So when people get on their high pony and say, wow, we're so much better with nuclear weapons than Russia, I'm sorry. With due respect, that's uninformed. That's not the reality. And one of the things that Daniel Ellsberg did for us is put us in touch with reality. His last book is called The Doomsday Machine. And that book makes it very clear that US military policy having to do with nuclear weapons is no better or worse than Russia's. And what we need is the willingness to engage in diplomacy. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, it made the chances of nuclear war even worse. And when Joe Biden responded by giving a State of the Union address a few days later, and in 6,000 words, he didn't mention the danger of nuclear war once, he didn't mention nuclear weapons once. It was all about, we got to fight them, we got to defeat them. And right now, and for the last 18 months, on Capitol Hill and in the White House, everything to do with Ukraine, none of it has to do with diplomacy. Diplomacy is a dirty word. And as long as diplomacy is a dirty word, then nuclear Armageddon gets closer and closer. And that doomsday clock that we talk about, and we should talk about it from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, it's the closest it's ever been at 90 seconds to midnight. And if we refuse to support individually and collectively diplomacy, it's going to get closer and closer to midnight. So we need, I think, to challenge ourselves and each other to say, what is it in US media? What is it in US politics? What is it in our own culture that says, now diplomacy is a dirty word? And the answer is, we're told, oh, that's because Putin's so bad and he's done such bad things. Well, that's true. Putin's done a lot of really bad things. There are people dying in Ukraine because he's done a lot of bad things and doing them every day. And he's playing catch up with the United States. Because if you look at the 21st century, far and away, it isn't even close. The country that's caused the most slaughter, killed the most people from invasions is the United States of America, in Afghanistan and in Iraq in particular. So the idea that, oh, we can't talk to them because they're so bad, that's a prescription for more and more deaths. It's a prescription for nuclear war. I've been in Iraq before the invasion, and compared to the Russia of 2023, the Iraq of 2002 was way worse, way more repressive. And yet what we needed was diplomacy. If we'd had some genuine diplomacy instead of, hey, we've got to kill these people and do an invasion because somebody's got to die because we don't like 9/11 and the next election's coming up, a whole lot of people who are dead right now would still be alive, especially in Iraq, but also several thousand American veterans. One of the opportunities we have is to be more honest about the situation, be more informed and more honest, because the leadership is not going to come from the White House. It's not going to come from Democrats or Republicans on Capitol Hill. And so we have an opportunity to say that there is something called diplomacy, that maybe we can stop being so proud and arrogant about being Americans and realize that the United States has killed so many people based on so many lies. It doesn't justify what Russia does, and what Russia does doesn't justify what we're doing. If you look at the repression in Russia, which is really pretty damn bad, especially in the last couple of years, and compare it to the repression in the Soviet Union in 1967. And the repression in the Soviet Union in 1967 was way worse than what the Kremlin is doing now. And yet, in 1967, President Johnson, who was no peacenik, sat down for several days with the leader of the Soviet government, Alexei Kosygin, and they talked peace. And they talked about restraining nuclear weapons dangers instead of escalating them. And they put out a statement that was friggin' brilliant. And if Joe Biden put out a statement like that now, he'd be attacked by the liberals in Congress, the conservatives in Congress, the corporate media. He'd be attacked on CNN and Fox and MSNBC. So I would close by saying that we have a challenge for a reality check, because the leadership's not going to come from the top. It's not going to come from us who are believing what we hear on All Things Considered in Morning Edition and the PBS NewsHour and the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Fox. And as usual, the leadership, as the saying goes, when people lead from the grassroots, then maybe we can force the leaders to follow. So I do want to close along with thanking everybody who has made this event this evening possible with an invitation now. At rootsaction.org, we work as part of a coalition called Defuse Nuclear War. And we have a lot of co-sponsoring groups, and we have some events coming up. And the events are demanding real diplomacy from our government and going ahead to push for a ceasefire in Ukraine and some real negotiations. And so if anybody wants to participate, I invite you, go to the Diffuse Nuclear War website and sign up. In 30 seconds, we'll give you action updates. We're going to have picket lines around the country and more. And that's the last week in September of this year. So, hey, you're invited. Please go to diffusenuclearwar.org and see you on a picket line, maybe. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Norman. Sure. Would love to join anything I can do to help Roots Action. I support an independent Ukraine, and I've seen so many wars being waged by the West and the East in the name of authoritarianship or democracy or just old-fashioned robbing them of oil and minerals. But there's been so many wars that have been waged, and people need to have a anti-war movement like we did in the 60s and 70s to get people to realize that these wars can't continue